Thanks you all for coming out today. As David mentioned, we're kind of talking about housing, and I thought this was an interesting discussion point. I don't think of myself as someone who does housing particularly, and I don't mean to say that I don't actually do the housing work, but for me and the way that our team works, housing is a tool in a toolkit. We're actually thinking about community building, and I know that sounds kind of like a nice, fluffy way of saying it, but I think in terms of some of the discussions we're going to have today, maybe you'll understand why that is. And so thinking about the bigger picture of what actually is the role of housing. That's me. We already introduced. The afternoon's goal is really how to understand and pursue really community development holistically beyond single issue solutions such as housing. And really, as David mentioned, this term of urban anthropology, how we can use it to shape context-sensitive placemaking that celebrates local culture. So two kind of separate discussions, but we are framing this through the discussion around Selma, Alabama, a really interesting and special place in our country. You may know it, but for most Americans, this is a very symbolic image. The Edmund Pettus Bridge. This bridge has really become a symbol of courage and civic transformation in our country for a number of reasons. The backstory here is essential. It played a very critical role in 1965 in the civil rights movement. It's in the American Southeast, in a place where our black residents were held down significantly through numbers of means, but politically through political intimidation, literacy tests at the polls, a number of things that were holding down the black vote and black power. Selma was a city that was 85% black, yet the power was held in the hands of the white 15%. The residents there fought as much as they could to try to get back power, but could not get it. So they made a choice in 1965 to march from the city that you see on this end of the bridge to Montgomery, Alabama, the seat of government for the state that was about 50 miles away. They asked for a petition to march across state highway and were told no, they couldn't, but they still decided to march anyway, feeling they couldn't get power in their city, feeling they couldn't get power at their state. They said, let's march onto the state capitol regardless. The city is this side of the river. The moment that they crossed over this bridge, they went to an unincorporated county area where police power was held at the state level at the county level by sheriffs. So they were illegally marching once they crossed over to the other side of this bridge. These more than 600 marchers decided to do so anyway, following the school of thought of Dr. Martin Luther King, who was leading the civil rights movement. It was all about peaceful protest, and said, let's put this peaceful protest to the test. So as they walked onto the other side of the bridge, this is where they met state guards, who you can see in gas masks, holding guns and clubs. They stood there in their Sunday best and then decided to keep marching, even when the police told them to walk away. The scene turned from this very quickly into scenes that look like this, of people being beat, tear gas being used, and folks running back the other way across the bridge. As you can see, these images were posted all across the media. As you see the cover of Life magazine, these really harrowing images of people with their heads bandaged. No folks died on that day, but many folks were critically injured and some died in the weeks that followed. So there was loss of life. These images were everywhere, and this changed the American psyche. 2 weeks to the day later, with the aid of federal troops, they again marched to Montgomery. There had been in just that 2 weeks' time such a shift in the mentality that the marchers went with federal troops and were able to march all the way to the state courthouse. Within 5 months later, this is the same marchers standing in the White House where President Lyndon B. Johnson is signing the voting rights law into act. This removed all barriers to voting in our country, allowing all people of color equal access to the ballot. So very interesting to have folks in critical care and then be standing in the White House 5 months later, shaking the hand of the sitting president. So the actions of these folks to march on through this bridge changed the city in huge ways. And since that time, this continues to be a very, very powerful representation of democracy, of courage in our country. This is on the 50-year celebration, right after you see President Barack Obama here, first black president that we had, incoming at this time, walking with his forerunner, President George W. Bush, who was outgoing from office from different political parties, but walking across the bridge, showing the symbolic power of the first black president, recognizing that so much of that power was derived from this same bridge, and Black constituents that were able to vote for him 50 years later. So still an enduring symbol of legacy here. But the issue is that the city itself is not in good condition, has been always stress test, been a very quite small town. It's about 20,000 folks. But in many ways, the state continued to punish the city for years afterwards, not allowing state funds to reach the city. And so it was a very, very stressed place to begin with. And in 2023, a major tornado came through, ripped up huge amounts of the city and left it in a state of disarray. Really much of the downtown was left empty. Hundreds of homes were destroyed. And so that's kind of why we're bringing this conversation about housing today, because there was an immediate need for housing as much as possible. Around 2,000 people were forced to leave the city to go other places just to find short-term housing, hoping that they could come back to the city in due time. That same year at the annual Bridge Marching Jubilee, we had then President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris come and march the bridge as well. And they saw the state of the city. This is just 4 weeks after the tornadoes had come through. And they decided to bring in national support to help a really struggling city. The motto was kind of, Selma has given so much to the country. It's now our time to give back to the city of Selma. A major DC-based nonprofit, which is known as the Partnership for Equitable and Resilient Cities, or PERC. PERC was brought in to assemble a team of about 20 folks to come in and think strategically for the city of Selma, all the ways that we could bring in improvements. And we had the lucky privilege to be brought in with this team. Is about 20 people that covered multiple industries on the team. I was privileged to be one of two white people on the team. So in some ways I get lucky to tell this story today. I don't pretend to speak on behalf of Black Americans, but I was privileged to be part of this team, bring my particular expertise around housing and community development, which is why I'm speaking about it today. But yeah, we came in and started to create a new plan on behalf of the city. And so that tees up kind of the first area that I wanted to speak about, which is holistic community development. The creation of the plan was a plan for downtown Selma. It is a large city, but it was really the downtown that was most damaged, that lost much of its business, lost a lot of its basic infrastructure. So planning around those things. The process was certainly guided by community engagement, by countless members of the community who worked with us, and a nonprofit that helped us collect their thoughts, that helped interface with the community. But we very early on did an early assessment of the previous efforts that had been occurring in and around the city, and much had been dumped into the city in terms of money, funds, expertise in other areas. But it became very clear that a lot of these thoughts and investments were Band-Aids. They were isolated projects that weren't coordinated in any way. So we were throwing money at an infrastructure thing over here that didn't have much correlation with economic development over here. This was this photo that's kind of low res, but was a major amphitheater that much of money was put into by the city, thousands of dollars. And we ultimately said, what was the purpose of that? And they were like, oh, we do this concert once or twice a year. And we're like, you put all the money into this when folks need basic infrastructure like housing. So there were a lot of things that were good in isolation, but they weren't adding up. And so one of the first things that was asked of us is, where do we put money? How do we find places to put money? We're asking about housing, but how do we choose housing? And so the first thing that we did was try to think of a rubric for which we could apply thinking, expertise, investment. And we ultimately ended up developing what you see here, which is the life cycle of community prosperity. We were being told all these different issues. And we realized that it became clear that they did not necessarily understand that all of these issues existed within an ecosystem. And if we were hoping to improve people's lives and uplift the community, we had to do it in a holistic way. And so there's 6 parts to this life cycle diagram. The first is about basic civic livability. This is about providing basic infrastructure access through roads, through streets, through just that core needs. If you get that right and can provide access, the better version of it, you can go even farther, is about physical well-being. Can you make those places healthy? Can you make them safe for folks to be in the streets, to be enjoying them, to be using them, to have safe access to medical care and other components as well. As you go beyond that, as you do more, the next thing that you need to be serving as well is education. That's everything from school age education with children, but also professional education, mentorship, another component that you need to be getting right. The next thing beyond that is if you're getting that right and people are getting educated, then you need to be thinking about economic vibrancy, how people are applying that skills and knowledge into business and helping creating an economy that's moving it along. As that's occurring, as people are developing businesses, it goes into wealth generation, or people have the tools they need to buy in, have home ownership, to use their wealth in smart ways, to invest it in smart ways. As folks start to generate wealth, this becomes larger scale community prosperity. And this shows up in lots of ways, not just financially, but also the legacy of a place, the culture is there, the quality of life that people experience. And as the community has prosperity, then it feeds back into, number one, the basic infrastructure. And all these things work in a cycle. What we were trying to point out to them is that if you want to uplift a community, you have to get all of these things right. You can't invest in just one. You have to invest all in six. And then if you think about it, if you invest in any few and not the others, the whole system falls apart. A great example, if you invest in education, you train up a whole generation, but you don't invest in economic development, you have brain drain. Everyone leaves. There's not jobs for them. They run away. If you invest in infrastructure and it's not safe, people aren't going to use it. And so really, it's kind of all these parts that you have to get right. And this ultimately became the clear rubric for us to understand where you invest, making sure you're getting all of these things right if you want to see really powerful change. This ultimately informed a large scale, and I won't get into this, but ultimately this large set of goals that we created, 8 distinct goals that were derived from those. That turned into 3 periods of time. And I say all this to say is that ultimately the overlap between these 3 phases that we were working in and these 8 goals, where each of those crossed in the middle of this matrix, turned into specific projects that we were working on. And I say that's important because if you're thinking about these huge, big life cycle, that's a ton to do in a community, and that can be extremely overwhelming, extremely intimidating. So then we had to start at the smallest things that could be the short term, the 3 to 12 months, so that we could think about the long-term things later. We also had to really get buy-in from the community. So we needed small little pilot projects of food vendor opportunities, of street tree plantings, of small things that we could do. So if we got it right in the short term, we could get it right in the longer terms. So it was this real model that allowed us to engage with the community and prove out to them that we were doing lots of things. This then became the rubric of trying to think in every way possible, what were the projects that generated the most community good? And so what you see here, one was signature project, was taking out lanes in the street to create this signature walk path that followed the route that the marchers marched from the church they started in all the way to the bridge. So the signature streetscape moment that had educational signage all across it. And we could count on both hands all the community benefits that this had, that was creating this educational story that was being told. It was giving ground floor retail units proof that investment was happening in the street so they could invest in their businesses, knowing that there'd be new tourism dollars walking by their storefronts every day. There was safety components, thinking through the reworking of the streetscape, slowing down vehicles, traffic calming. So there's just countless benefits through some of these mixed projects that we were doing. There was also that we found on the old historic map, one of the parcels was a historic civic market that had been gone for years. When we looked through this, read histories, we found this is one of the first places that integrated businesses happened at the turn of the 20th century, where black butchers were able to sell their product along next to white butchers and the like. And so we found this place where we could do the most community good here by having fresh food in this area. In order to do this, we had to develop the blocks around it, so bringing in new multifamily housing that was adjacent to now the civic infrastructure that had fresh foods. And as well, you can see the walk path running along here, the march route path as well. So the way that all of these signature projects were overlapping to kind of create this community good that checked all those boxes. And then as we looked at housing, they had hundreds of folks who had been displaced because of the storm. And what they were starting out was saying, hey, we're going to need to replace these legacy single-family detached houses that we have. This is what the city's known for, and we need hundreds of them. But when we asked through the lens of what generates the most community good, it honestly wasn't these single-family homes. We saw there's intense need for housing, but we needed to find places that had other benefits beyond just single-use homes. When we questioned this, it became clear that multifamily, in a lot of ways, that housing in general is as a product is the best thing to deliver the most community good. So when you look at this life cycle diagram and you think about all the various stakeholders that are involved, whether that's policing or medical care providers or educational institutions, and you say who of them could achieve the most good, we kind of ran through, ultimately decided it was housing providers that actually could do the most. And that's because they're physical spaces that cross the city. It's a diversity of audiences that engage with housing products. You have flexible ground floor spaces and a lot of uses that can host a variety of needs. And that really there's a lot of assets that are paired with housing. And if you're giving them to a few, there's also a need for a many that can use those as well. And so it became clear as we studied everything through this lens that housing had to be the solution that could be the most things as possible. I'll jump through that. But ultimately what we created is a diagram around the center of the city where the most dense housing was, and the green that you see, and then the blue area, and then it dropped down to where some of the other existing single family housing was. And when you look back at things like this market image, you can see the intensity of housing that was built around there. For them, 4 stories was enormous in kind of the smaller town, but we were able to explain the benefit and really make it clear that all the things that they were wanting and needing in the city and all the benefits and assets, all of those were associated with density in some way. And so when folks were saying, yes, we like the idea of low density single family housing, they were also saying they wanted the benefits of density. And we're like, okay, well, you kind of got to, it's a trade-off here. But when we showed all of these things located together and the power of all of the assets that would be close at hand, folks were choosing immediately to preference to the denser product and actually suggesting it should be taller than we had originally planned, understanding that was all kind of viewed through this rubric, not just what type of house do you want to live in. So anyway, the lessons I think are a lot for the housing sector in general, as we're talking about all the ways that housing can be more than just housing, that it can be a deliverer of cultural identity, that it can be a deliverer of health and safety, that it can be a deliverer of economic opportunity. And so that's one thing that we've been now banging on with all of our products since, is asking what those things can be. And so in projects that we've been doing recently in the States, thinking about new orientations of multifamily products that overlook central green spaces. So they are serving now community needs. There's health and safety needs when eyes are on these little courtyards, the coordination between all the various uses that can occur in a building, pushing our developer partners to incorporate as many things as they can, all with this idea that you're not just doing housing, you're doing community development. In order to get it right, you need to be hitting on these various needs. And I don't think we bumped up against anyone who wasn't willing to try 1 or 2 new things that they hadn't tried before. So bring in one use, bring in a plaza that's open, or bring in a flex community space on your ground floor. And most folks, when put with that proposition, they're willing to do it. And the other part of it is that you're seeing here is there's really the coordination. And that if there's a bunch of housing providers in an area, everyone can be talking and everyone can say, can you bring some health benefits? Can you bring some civic benefits? Can you bring some educational benefits? And if everyone's able to take on just a little bit more than they would normally do, the whole is so great, so much greater than the sum of the parts when you're really uplifting the community just by doing one little thing. So that's kind of what we've been asking and really finding a lot of success with our housing partners. The latter part of this is just thinking through this idea of urban anthropology. If you don't know, it's a term, I love that David said, I'm self-determined. It's a term that I've just sort of made up for myself, not because I'm trying to, not a proprietary term that I'm like going to force a podcast or a book on you later or anything, more because it's sort of the convergence of all the nerdy things that excite me in the work, and I just needed a word for it. But when we were working in Selma, one of the things that we were being told by everyone involved was what progress was. We were told progress would be the renovation of these Main Street buildings, these turn of the 20th century commercial buildings that should look a certain way. This is the Main Street in Montgomery, again, 50 miles away, where massive amount of work was dumped into the preservation of these facade grants, community programs, and all of a sudden they weren't being used. And everyone in Montgomery was being like, why aren't these buildings coming to life in the way that we wanted to? If you ask folks in Montgomery, where actually Montgomery that's 2/3 Black, if you ask them what's important to them, what's telling their story, it's this. This is the National Memorial to Lynchings. This is a very, very powerful, very impressive, very celebrated monument that denotes all of the lynchings that have ever occurred in America. It is a profoundly beautiful, surreal, humbling experience that has been visited by millions of Americans. Very, very well done. But this is what Montgomery believed was special to them, was telling their story, not this. And so in Selma, we were being told the same thing. You need to renovate all these Main Street facades. You've got this beautiful building stock. You need to bring it to life. Folks did not want that. And we asked them, well, what do you want? And they said, we want Wakanda. Wakanda, the fictional city in the Black Panther movies that is supposed to be the center of Black culture in Africa, that is supposed to be a celebration of all of the Black diaspora, architecturally, designed, culturally. And this was sort of being said to us in jest. People didn't actually think we were going to design this, but there was truth to that of we want our story told, we want our culture told. And what ended up being the realization is that this idea that they were being told what was progress, for them, this was turn of the 20th century, who was in power? This was white people in the city. And by renovating these storefronts, you were reinforcing the systems of power that were in place in that time frame. And so, yes, it made sense that the Black community felt no connection to this whatsoever. Yet every consultant who had come in, everyone was there, was telling them, if you just renovate the Main Street buildings, you'll see this incredible investment downtown. So we really had to break that down and understand what that was, what it was that was important to them. Why this matters in 2025, I mean, everywhere we look, development is looking indistinguishable. This is photographs from several continents here, and you probably couldn't tell me which city any of these are. Everything's becoming Instagrammable. Everything's becoming the same international chains arriving everywhere. In our country, we're getting this gentrification starter kit meme that you see everywhere, and it's sort of a who's showing up when gentrification occurs, what architecture typology. It's the Edison bulb. It's this one poor metal bench that always gets thrown under the bus. But really, when everyone's laughing about this meme, they're talking about this feeling that someone is coming from the outside and telling the community what's best for them. And it's kind of sameness. And people are really, really frustrated by that when they really want to celebrate their own culture. And so when I've been thinking about what urban anthropology is, it's really studying how people actually live, move, gather, and express themselves in the city. It's paying attention to the rituals, symbols, and patterns that give that place a soul. And it's asking how the built environment can support those patterns instead of erasing them. Every choice that you're making in designing the built environment is doing one thing or other. It's either supporting the patterns or it's erasing them. It can't really be neutral. We can't make neutral design decisions. So urban anthropology is sort of just a way that I've been talking about asking the right questions to get to the bottom of this. So with the folks in Selma, we looked at a few districts in the US that have been done really well, where there's a very, very, very clear tie between the design language that's there and some sort of roots on the ground. This is a development in Austin, Texas, where I used to live, that's based on the old power plant. Everything about the design is based on power. And so there's all these cool things done. All the public art is done with lights, all of the materials, all these industrial materials, all from this kind of late deco industrial area. And they've done so much with it, but it's all ties to a very real thing that occurred on the ground that people had pride about. The old power plant logo on the power plant is a shirt that everyone wears. That's how much pride they have about the design of this old utilitarian structure. And so taking what was there and expanding it across the site. A different site in San Antonio, Texas, where an old brewery, the old Pearl Brewery was there, and it was all using original Texas stone from quarries. They were like 10 miles away. There's all this naturalistic things on the site, so the site becomes all about nature and stone and this old turn-of-the-century brewing. And really, there's a lot of storytelling that occurs there. And so we're asking folks in Selma, what stories do y'all want to tell? We did this survey with a series of adjectives. We asked them beyond, what things were exciting them. And we were very interested to hear that all the adjectives they came back with, the things that you see here, nothing of it had to do with the past. The city that's been forced into it, thinking about the past all the time. What happened in 1965? Y'all are famous because of 1965. They don't want to talk about 1965 anymore. They want to talk about the future, and they want to be a place that's dynamic, that's progressive, that's diverse, that's welcoming. And so we started doing a lot of things with them, pulling imagery that felt like this and asking them what felt like them. And they're like, this feels like the right energy, but it still doesn't look like this. And ultimately, we ended up going to our friend AI. If you're looking for a good use case of when to actually use AI, this is a great example where we put into Midjourney, we said, put in the streets of downtown Selma, Alabama, with murals used in artistic ways, some of which that had sort of African roots, new construction. They wanted green walls, they wanted lush landscape, and we typed all that in and got a number of images that look like these. And we went back and showed the community and we're like, is this it? And they were like, this is incredible, because they could see their same building stock there, but used in a different way, and in a way where they were coming back to these same adjectives, where they got the stuff that was global, that was cultured, that was dynamic, that was green, that was lively, that was welcoming. And so it took something as simple as this to get them excited about development. A group that had never been excited about redeveloping their main street were all of a sudden like, yes, please do this. This would be incredible. And it's sort of like no one had given them permission to dream in any different way. And so it was really cool to hand them the freedom to do that. We ultimately just said, we don't know the right way to do this, but we're going to go find a group of design partners for you. And so through our connections, we found sort of a lot of leaders who are leaders in Black architecture, Black landscape architecturally trained artists who do public art, who are all in interesting discussions. And we connected them with this group and we said, this is who can develop for you in the future. And they were blown away. They're like, we've been dreaming all this by ourselves and we didn't know this network was out here. And so ultimately, the last set of drawings that I showed you, some of those other early images, there were sort of those loose watercolors. And in the end, we came back and we said, no, let's actually get some computer generated ones that look really nice, where we can show murals on these buildings, where we can show now this walking trail has this super lush landscape on it, that the light poles have this cool graffiti art. There's this blue patterning on here, murals everywhere. And all of a sudden people are like, oh yeah, this is a place that we feel with, that we vibe with. There was an interesting discussion around, this is the existing police station, this red brick building in the back, turning it into a justice center, and the removal of a building, now not preserving a building, but removing a building and putting a public open space next to a police building, and rethinking what sort of justice is. And so calling a justice center, we're actually working with police force in a new and different way in 2025, trying to figure out what justice is. And this became a city where you can ask some of those complex questions. So there's all sorts of things built in to this programmatically that prods at some of those really important questions. But I think in general, the lessons for the housing sector is that if you're working in the housing world, you're already in an anthropological world in some sense. You are housing people. You are creating a space that dictates their patterns, how they live, how they feel, the safety there. And so we're asking folks to ask the questions, what's a story that only this neighborhood could tell, that only this community tell? To ask designers, what does home look and feel like for the people who've lived here? In so many of the places that we work, whether it's in nonprofit housing, community housing, a lot of the folks that we're housing come from places where they've experienced prejudice, where they've experienced real trauma. And so housing is not just a roof over your head. It can be a place that says you belong here, that says you are safe here. And really, what can we be doing to design those spaces? And so certainly my images from my world are planning and urban design. So there are things in the public realm, but it's just as well that you could be doing this in housing, that the lobby of a space tells a community story, that has a timeline of a community, that's a mural of famous faces of a culture. But other reasons it's important is that thoughtful placemaking can actually just strengthen belonging, and create informal support networks, improve perceived and real safety. And so design choices and things that support, that lean into these communities and celebrate these communities can ultimately create more ownership, more pride, more safety. And so you're not investing in traditional security. You're not forced to put up CCTV cameras that scare everyone and feel like Big Brother. You can create natural safety because you've elected to go this route. And in general, I'd say from a designer's perspective, whenever we're thinking about working community housing partners, we always love a good design brief. We would rather not put up arbitrary design. We would rather put up something that reflects the community. So if we're picking out tiles that spell out a color about a community or something. So I think we always like to put that out into the housing world. But anyway, I think what's into this for folks who do housing, if you really lean into this, is that designs that actually work for your residents, residents that feel like the place that was built with them, spaces get used in the way that you want, that there's less arbitrary decision making, you choose elements that tie back to a story, make it easier to defend cost and choices, that there's always stronger community outcomes with the same dollar, you get more impact without necessarily spending more, and ultimately, I think one thing that I think we're always saying to our folks is like, this isn't about asking folks to care more or be more of a social justice warrior. It's really about taking the tools that you have and making the most of them and using them in ways that can create benefits for a community, that can uplift a community and create greater value for all those community members. So I think big picture takeaways as we're thinking about Selma, particularly around the housing sector, is that really creating a home for all means treating housing as one pillar in a broader spectrum. You're not just doing housing. Number two, home is somewhere to sleep, but it's also somewhere to feel safe, to feel like yourself, and that's up to all of us to create that. And then this third one here, I'll say one thing that was so important in Selma is that if you ask the marchers what they were marching for, they won't tell you they were marching for voting rights. They'll tell you they were marching for justice, and they were marching for self-determination, and self-determination ultimately to have options in the world. And so when we went and visited Selma the first time, it was clear the folks there today did not have options. So yes, they had a right to vote, but they didn't have opportunity. And so what we were creating through all this was a system that was just. And so they had in their mind, there's a type of housing for us that will be just housing, not just housing, just housing. I just realized that's complicated to say. And so for us, justice wasn't a speech or a law. It had to show up in the streets. People had to feel justice there in the buildings and the daily experiences of the community. And that we as designers could help push that along to move that for them. And so that in that way, housing providers are part of the justice infrastructure, though you don't always feel that. And so really, I think lastly, just that we were saying housing is not just building to house people, it's building to honor people. And that's something that's been really cool as some of these projects and spaces have started to come along, this new park under the bridge, allowing people to take this in. And so this has been a really powerful way for us to think about housing is so much more. So yeah, that's all I got for today. Yeah. Happy to take any questions. Yes, sir. So I gave you that small little matrix that was sort of a sampling of the larger implementation strategy. It turned into a much larger implementation strategy, and so that is being pursued right now. We are working with private developers to deliver a lot of the downtown product, and that's what's going on right now. The sketchy thing that you see here is sort of a river walk kind of waterfront thing. The Army Corps of Engineers was doing reinforcing of the waterfront. There was a major bill. It was one of the things that preceded us, and they were putting millions of dollars into just reinforcing a steep waterfront edge, and that was it. And like certainly that has community benefit in the sense that it's holding up buildings and holding back. But we said, can it also be paired with some of these community benefits like this waterfront? And they were able to deliver. So that's currently in process now. I'm trying to think what else in the public realm is. No, I mean, I kind of stayed at the high level some of the sexier things. There's things like basic streetscaping that needed to be done. So that's been done on all the downtown streets that needed to be reapplied or resurfacing. I mean, there is up at the very top center is that little brown building that is Brown Chapel where the marches started. There is a monument going in there, the Foot Soldiers Park, which is sort of the starting place of the marches. So there's a public investment there to a new park that's sort of the beginning of that march route, which is the orange lines that kind of run through downtown. Ooh, this is an hour-long discussion. The short answer is this is a bonkers setting. It's a place I've never worked where they get millions of visitors a year to come to the bridge. Right now, most people spend time in Montgomery, where you saw the kind of the National Lynching Memorial, some of the other more significant civil rights history infrastructure is there. Folks are jumping on buses, riding over here, walking across the bridge, getting back on a bus and driving back to Montgomery. So it's crazy to be in a place that had huge tourism numbers, but no tourism industry to support it. And so that was like kind of thing one that we need to get right. So there is a program where we're identifying ground floor uses that could support small businesses, and they're working with a number of small businesses that existed in the city, a lot that just existed informally. A woman who was doing a catering service from her home and just operating in that way. So trying to pair those small businesses with vacant ground floor storefronts because there's so much vacancy, and working with those business owners and being like, you're not going to get a long-term vacant or a long-term tenant for quite some time. So let's kind of look at some of these short-term occupation strategies, which has been kind of a really successful way of thinking about all of that. There's lots of different ways that there were plans to build up the tourism economy as much as possible. There is a 2-year university there, does associates programs, investing in their tourism, and I can't think of the name of that degree program is. It's like hospitality management, so giving them educational skills. The program exists right now in Montgomery, where there's a partnership between the educational program and a very high-end restaurant. And so students are both kind of working at the restaurant as sort of their learning occupation. So taking that model that exists not too far down the road, bringing it here. So just simple things like that, where you're trying to, in many ways as possible, build up small tourism industry in these storefronts that can be right here. But in the time that we've been there, because some things just totally outside of our doing, just some of these buildings just got occupied and little coffee shops and other things were popping up. I think just because people felt like change was on the horizon. And that was just really cool to see some of those just naturally starting to occur as well. But the things like the march route, I mean, it became very clear where we were putting that, and much in the way that like a streetcar line begets other, tenants along that line. The hope is that that will be continued to be the case.
So it sounds like local developers are the first ones that are going to move on it. How did you go getting everyone to buy into the bigger picture? Because obviously, in Adelaide, you've probably got all these little developers doing their own thing, and to coordinate something like that for a big town centre type project would be a bit tricky. Was there some overarching agreement or something like that they bought into? Or?
The most concise answer is that everything was dead. And from the 2023 tornado to the time we showed up, I mean, there was no movement at all in the city. And so you had a number of developers sitting on property in prime areas downtown, and they just needed the assurance that if they started investing in their properties, that they were going to receive a return on that. And so in a lot of ways, by producing a big plan, by walking around with our big book and showing up to everyone and being like, here's our giant plan, we were able to give them assurance that they could work with their backers and start moving things.
I was just going to ask a question just before we wrap up. You spoke about heights, density, amenity. As I was sharing with you, the City of Adelaide has released airport shackles in terms of heights. What were some of those community conversations that you had to really almost tease out the feelings within the community of height?
It's so funny because
it's all good.
Are you saying this because I skipped that one slide?
Well, look, I wasn't going to raise it, but it was a good slide.
Where is it now? I skipped this one slide because I was like, I'm running short on time. The discussion that's become so present in our work is now showing up to communities where someone has some hesitancy about density. And we've started to frame it through this discussion. This is a picture of an activity that we did at a community engagement meeting where we're always talking about this spectrum that exists, where on the top of the spectrum is housing typologies running from least dense to most dense. And on the bottom half is amenities, public amenities that are related to that, running from least dense to most dense, and made it clear that there is 100% correlation between those. And what you can see is people using red and green stickers to vote. Guess what? Everyone wants all of the amenities. You can see on the top the green stickers over here about single family. They start to get a little bit more uncomfortable as they start to get townhomes. By the time they get to high rise, they're very uncomfortable. All red stickers. But look, the amount of transit they wanted is all green stickers. And so we just had to say, these things do not exist in isolation. We've done this activity before where we haven't put stickers on the photos, we put stickers on the line. So you've got to choose somewhere along the spectrum. People tend to land from about like right here to about right here, which makes it clear that no one wants to be on that low density end and no one wants to be on the extreme high density end either, but they want to be somewhere in the middle, and they're kind of skirting the line with a density level that they're comfortable with. But the moment we did this, I just think everyone was like, sure, just like help us get it right. I think another thing that's interesting about this is that in a lot of the places that we work, particularly a place like Selma, there is no precedent in anyone's mind of good design from about that level of density all the way up to here. So we've used this many times. I hate this duplex because every time there's red stickers on that duplex photo, it's always that photo. It's a bad photo. But it's about finding the right quality design that's context sensitive with the folks. This activity is not about design. It's about typology and its relationship to civic assets. But anytime that folks have expressed, once they place their dots and they just express some discomfort with these particular images, the next activity is going to find images that they're comfortable with. For every typology, there's a good design somewhere that someone will be excited about. You just need to help them find it. But I think with all this activity too, we're never forcing anything on anyone. We're just, you can end up on that end if you want, you can end up on this end. We just want to make sure that you as a community land in a place that's right for you. And for them, they were very comfortable with downtown stuff being all the way around here. As well, the other part of it is that we were saying to them, you've got plenty of single family product already in the city. One of the things that was very surprising is that there was some kind of garden style apartments on the fringe of the city, and a place where we're like, you have density in places where you receive no benefits for the density. So you're asking people to live with denser products, but there's no benefit to them in walking distance. Like that model, and that's what the zoning said. The zoning on the fringes was like these garden style stuff. And we're like, that makes no sense. Do not make people do that. If you're gonna give them density, give them the trade-off of the other stuff. So I think, I'm not sure exactly what your question was, but I think to your point, this is a conversation we've continuously been staging and finding more and more realization that everything everyone loves about the city is sort of correlated to density. You want to be in an active, vibrant park, you need eyes on that park. You want some more significant commercial entities that are buzzing at night, you need density around that. And so you just have to be finding that balance that's appropriate for everyone. Does that get to your question? Okay.
I think from a personal note, from a South Australian Adelaide note, I would love to be involved in some sessions like that with our councils, our communities.
Sure.
To understand that, it'd be really interesting to see where Adelaide sits and the Adelaide, the border,
Sure.
metropolitan Adelaide sits within that. Mindful of time, thank you again. If
Sure.
you could all give Blake a round, say thank